I'm just going to say up front, I'm improvising this as I go. I'm not reading off of notes. I don't have an outline. So I'm not going to tell you how many times I've started this and then had to stop because I start meandering into some story that doesn't have actually anything to do with what I'm trying to get across here. But we'll give this another go. Um, Really, the only thing that I want to talk about here is why the United States and why NATO are not doing some of the things that various pundits, politicians, and others, really are screaming for us to do. The biggest of which is, why aren't we putting a no-fly zone over Ukraine? Okay, the reason we're not putting a no-fly zone over Ukraine is because, well, both the Ukrainians and the Russians have extremely good surface-to-air missile systems that they've installed. They both have extremely good Stinger, in other words, handheld stuff that you can shoot helicopters out of the sky with, low flying aircraft out of the sky with. Um, both sides have all of that. And on top of that, the Russians also have really good, you know, air defense capabilities that exist outside of Ukraine, but they can look sort of inside Ukraine. Um, which means that if we were going to try to provide air cover, a no-fly zone over Ukraine, the following things would immediately happen. Number one, we would not just be a wink, wink, nod, nod. Ukraine is our proxy while we fight a war. We fight an indirect war with Russia. We would be an active participant. We would be a belligerent. We'd be flying our planes around in the skies of Ukraine, and we wouldn't be doing it on a neutral basis. It's not like we would be there because the Ukrainians are committing war crimes with their planes, and we're gonna shoot Ukrainian planes down, as well. We would be, we're not there at the auspices of the UN wearing little blue helmets. To indicate that we're peacekeepers and we're not going to fire unless we're fired upon. We would be active belligerents, active participants in that war, and we would be in that war for one purpose, which is to effectively shoot down any Russian plane that dares take off. And the other thing that we would have to do is, whether we were fired upon or not, we would have to take out surface-to-air missile installations that the Russians have in Ukraine, and we would have to take out radar installations that are in Belarus and Russia that are looking into Ukraine. Because if we did not, our pilots would be flying around in Ukraine constantly, having their early warning systems indicate to them that, some radar installation somewhere is lighting them up. And that indicates that in the next, however long it takes, it is entirely possible that there's going to be a surface to air missile coming to make their acquaintance, uh, you know, 10,000 feet over Ukraine. So, in other words, in order for us to have a tolerable situation in which we could create a no-fly zone, we would either have to have the Russians agree beforehand that it's like, okay, we're just going to turn our stuff off, or we would have to neutralize all of those capabilities that the Russians have in order to make this work. Okay, and again, like I say, we would not be doing it as an objective third party coming in to be a peacekeeper. We would be doing it as a belligerent, kind of on behalf of Ukraine. Okay, and the issue would be, once you are shooting at things that are outside of Ukraine, once you are blowing things up in Belarus or in Russia, this is no longer a war that is being fought in the sandbox of Ukraine. This is now a war that is being fought on Russian soil. Just because we don't have troops on the ground in Russia does not mean that we're not blowing shit up in Russia. And that's war on the ground in Russia. Russia would very understandably view that as a potential existential threat. They, you know, put conscription. Well, they already have conscription, but they suddenly every male between the ages of 18 and 60 would be, getting fitted for a uniform. They'd be all the stuff that they've got mothballed, probably going back to World War II. They'd be hauling out of storage, whatever they haven't already used in Ukraine. All of those things, they got like a million people in their reserve. They could theoretically field a million-man army. Okay, well, the United States is not in any danger of having a million-man army come, march from Russia to the United States. But it would still create an issue. It could still certainly, march into Poland, and then, again, all of a sudden, there's a much larger war going on than what is currently going on. So again, this is the reason why we're not establishing a no-fly zone, because there's no practical way to do that. And also there's no practical way to establish a no-fly zone for the purpose of keeping humanitarian corridors open or creating humanitarian corridors, because you're effectively having to do exactly the same thing, which is you're going to have to neutralize any Russian unit that could theoretically be firing upon a NATO coalition plane that is flying over Ukrainian airspace. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I know President Zelensky's been hollering for Poland to, or for NATO at least, to provide Ukraine with more MiGs for the Ukrainians to fly. Well, there are a couple of problems with this. Number one, there's no practical way for us to provide MiGs from a NATO country to Ukraine without that being kind of an active declaration of war between that host nation and now Ukraine. I understand. Look, it's like, what's the difference between pushing an airplane across the border as opposed to having a guy standing on one side, drop a javelin over the border for some guy standing on the other side of the border. And I understand that's a difficult. That's a very good argument. It's like, aren't those effectively parallel things? I think what I would say is that the difference is a javelin missile by itself is not a game-changing weapon. I mean, javelins collectively are a game-changing weapon because, as we've seen, Ukrainians are very good at using them to blow Russian stuff up. So that's been extremely helpful for the Ukrainians. But a fighter jet by itself is theoretically a game-changing weapon. I mean, a fighter jet is something that can carry many times more of a payload than a drone can, for instance. So you're not just talking about this kind of irritating situation where a drone flies up and blows up your tank, or blows up blows up a fuel tank, or just a truck that is loaded down with material. A fighter jet is theoretically something that could take out an entire company. If take out 200 men, by the time it gets done, because it's got a payload capacity to fire off a lot of shit. And so, and plus it's extremely fast. It's got, a lot of technological sophistication built into it. I don't know what a javelin costs, for, just the javelin without without what it's firing. What, $10,000, $15,000 to produce, whereas a fighter jet is what, 15 million, 20 million, maybe more, maybe a lot more. I don't know. But it is it is game changing in terms of the magnitude of the threat that is presented by a fighter jet as opposed to just somebody driving across the border with a truck that is filled with, javelins, stingers, a bunch of AK-47s, a bunch of ammunition, stuff like that. So that's one reason. Um, the other issue, again, which goes back to the very pragmatic issue of both the Ukrainians and the Russians having really good surface-to-air missiles and radar capabilities for keeping track of what's going on in the air, is that Ukraine is not suffering from a lack of aircraft. They've got something like 80% of the aircraft that they started the war out with, and they still have places to park them, and to take off from. They still are running sorties over Ukraine, still blowing Russian stuff up. So their problem is not that they really just desperately need more fighter aircraft. The problem that they have is that, again, as I said earlier, both Ukraine and Russia have extremely good air defense capabilities, which means just having more aircraft isn't actually going to be useful for them, because they'll be doing is they'll be providing more targets for Russian anti-aircraft systems to find and deal with. Okay, so again, like I said, this was all improvised. So I'm going to go back and watch this now and see how many times I repeated the same points over and over again. And if I haven't done it too much, I'll probably post this somewhere.